The screams still echoed in Caleb's dreams, sharp, desperate cries of a boy no one wanted. At 16, he'd been that boy, thrown out of St. Mary's Orphanage in rural Ohio with nothing but a backpack and a bruised heart. They'd called him unnatural, a stain on their holy walls, all because he loved differently. Now, at 32, Caleb stood outside those same iron gates, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes. The orphanage loomed like a ghost from his past, its gray stone walls unchanged, but he was no longer the trembling teen they'd discarded. He was a man with a purpose, a successful architect with a life built on resilience, and a heart set on saving another. The air was thick with autumn's chill as Caleb adjusted his scarf, his breath visible in the fading daylight. He'd come back to St. Mary's not for revenge, but for redemption. Somewhere inside was a boy named Eli, a 14-year-old who'd been abandoned for the same reason Caleb had, for being himself. Caleb's fingers tightened around the adoption papers in his coat pocket. He wasn't leaving without Eli. Inside, the orphanage smelled of old wood and stale hope. Sister Margaret, the stern matron who'd once banished him, still presided over the front desk. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized him, her lips thinning into a line of disapproval. "Caleb Thornton," she said, her voice like frost. "What brings you back?" "I'm here for Eli," Caleb said, his voice steady but laced with defiance. He slid the adoption papers across the desk. "I'm taking him home." Sister Margaret's gaze flicked to the papers, then back to Caleb. "You think you can just waltz in here and play savior? After the life you've chosen?" Her words dripped with judgment, each syllable a reminder of the rejection that had scarred him. Caleb leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "The life I've chosen is one of love and honesty. Eli deserves that, too. You don't get to decide his future." The tension in the room was a living thing, coiling tighter with every second. Sister Margaret's hand hovered over the papers, her face a battleground of duty and disdain. Caleb's heart pounded, but he refused to look away. He'd fought too hard to build a life with his partner, James, to let this woman's prejudice stop him now. James. The thought of him steadied Caleb's nerves. They'd met 5 years ago at a community fundraiser in Chicago, where James, a soft-spoken pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes, had spilled coffee on Caleb's sketchbook. Their laughter had sparked something instant, a connection that grew into a love Caleb never thought possible. Together, they'd built a home filled with warmth, a sanctuary they wanted to share with Eli. Sister Margaret finally pushed the papers back. "Eli's a troubled boy. He's been in fights, runs away constantly. You think you can handle him?" "I was him," Caleb said softly. "I know exactly what he needs." She scoffed but stamped the papers, her movements sharp. "You'll need to meet him first. He's in the common room." Caleb's heart raced as he followed her down the dim hallway, the walls lined with faded photographs of children who'd long since left or been forced out. The common room was a stark space, with chip tables and a single window letting in weak light. A group of boys played cards in one corner, but one sat alone, his dark hair falling over his eyes as he sketched furiously in a notebook. "Eli," Sister Margaret called, her voice cutting through the room. The boy's head snapped up, his expression guarded. He was thin, with sharp cheekbones and a defiance in his blue eyes that Caleb recognized instantly. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. Caleb approached slowly, crouching to meet Eli's gaze. "Hey," he said gently. "I'm Caleb. I'd like to talk to you if that's okay." Eli's eyes narrowed, his pencil stilling. "What do you want?" "To give you a chance," Caleb said. "A real one." Eli's skepticism was palpable, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. Caleb knew that look, the hunger for someone to believe in you, to see you. He'd felt it at Eli's age, alone and terrified, until a kind foster parent had given him a lifeline. Now, Caleb wanted to be that for Eli. The conversation was slow, halting. Eli was wary, his answers short, but Caleb didn't push. He shared bits of his own story, growing up in the orphanage, the pain of being rejected, the joy of finding love and purpose. Eli listened, his guard lowering just enough for Caleb to see the boy beneath the armor. As they spoke, Caleb's mind drifted to James, waiting at home with dinner ready and a room prepared for Eli. James had been the one to encourage this, his quiet strength a constant anchor. "We can do this," James had said, his hand squeezing Caleb's. "We can give him a family." By the time Caleb left the orphanage, Eli hadn't agreed to anything, but he'd promised to think about it. Sister Margaret's parting words were cold. "Don't expect miracles, Caleb. Some boys are too broken to fix." Caleb's jaw tightened as he stepped into the crisp evening air. Eli wasn't broken. He was a survivor, just as Caleb had been. And Caleb would fight for him, no matter how long it took. The drive back to Chicago was quiet, the road stretching endlessly before him. Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from James. How'd it go? He smiled, typing back. He's tough, but he's worth it. We'll get there. That night, Caleb lay in James's arms, the weight of the day settling over him. Do you think we're ready for this? He whispered. James kissed his forehead. We're ready for anything, as long as we're together. Caleb closed his eyes, holding on to that truth. Tomorrow, he'd return to St. Mary's. For Eli, for the boy he'd been, for the family they could become. The next morning, Caleb woke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains. James was already up, humming in the kitchen as he brewed coffee. The scent grounded Caleb, a reminder of the life they'd built, a life he wanted Eli to know. At St. Mary's, the gates felt less imposing today, though the weight of Caleb's mission pressed heavier. Eli was in the courtyard this time, kicking a soccer ball against a cracked wall. His movements were sharp, almost angry, but Caleb saw the rhythm in them, the way Eli poured his frustration into each kick. Hey, Eli, Caleb called, keeping his tone light. Eli paused, the ball rolling to a stop. He didn't speak, but he didn't run either. A small victory. Mind if I join? Caleb asked, nodding at the ball. Eli shrugged, but his eyes followed Caleb as he stepped forward. They passed the ball in silence at first, the thump of leather against sneakers filling the air. Then Caleb spoke. I used to play out here, too. Help me think. Eli grunted, his kick harder than necessary. What do you want with me? Caleb caught the ball, holding it as he met Eli's gaze. I want you to have a home. With me and my partner, James. A place where you can be yourself. Eli's expression darkened. They told me no one would want me. Not after. He trailed off, his jaw tight. After they found out you're gay? Caleb finished gently. Eli flinched but nodded, his eyes dropping to the ground. Caleb's heart ached. He knew that shame, that fear of being unlovable. They're wrong, Eli. You're enough, just as you are. Eli didn't respond, but he took the ball back, his kick softer now. Caleb stayed, sharing stories of his life in Chicago, his work designing community centers, James's terrible puns, their dog, Max, who loved stealing socks. Slowly, Eli's silence gave way to questions. You really have a dog? What's Chicago like? Each word was a crack in his armor. Over the next week, Caleb visited daily. Sometimes they played soccer. Other times they sat on the orphanage steps, sketching together. Eli's drawings were raw, full of jagged lines and shadowed figures, but they spoke of a heart desperate to be heard. Caleb recognized that, too. Sister Margaret watched from a distance, her disapproval a constant shadow. One afternoon, she cornered Caleb in the hallway. You're filling his head with false hope, she said. What kind of life can you give him, living in sin? Caleb's hands clenched, but he kept his voice calm. A life where he's loved. That's more than this place ever gave him. Her eyes flashed, but she said nothing, turning away. Caleb knew she could make things difficult, delay the adoption, stir up trouble, but he wouldn't back down. Eli deserved better. At home, James was a rock, listening as Caleb vented about Sister Margaret's prejudice. She can't stop us, James said, his voice firm. We'll fight for him, together. Their evenings were spent planning, researching schools, decorating Eli's potential room, imagining a future as a family. But doubt crept in at night. What if Eli wasn't ready? What if Caleb wasn't enough? One evening, Caleb found Eli in the orphanage library, a small, dusty room with outdated books. Eli was reading a worn copy of The Catcher in the Rye, his fingers tracing the pages. You like it? Caleb asked, sitting beside him. It's okay, Eli muttered. Holden's kind of a mess, but he gets it. Feeling alone. Caleb nodded. I felt that way, too, until I found people who saw me for me. Eli looked up, his eyes searching. You think I could have that? I know you can, Caleb said, and I want to help you find it. For the first time, Eli smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but it lit something in Caleb's chest. He left the orphanage that day with hope, the adoption papers closer to being finalized. But as he drove home, a call from Sister Margaret shattered the moment. There's a problem, she said. Another family is interested in Eli. Caleb's grip tightened on the wheel. Another family. The words felt like a betrayal, a threat to the bond he was building. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't lose Eli. The news hit Caleb like a punch. Another family. He sat in his car outside the orphanage, the engine still running, Sister Margaret's voice echoing in his mind. They're a traditional couple, she'd said, her tone smug. Good people. Stable. The implication was clear. She thought they were better than Caleb and James. At home, Caleb paced the living room, his anxiety spilling over as he told James. They're trying to take him from us, he said, his voice raw. She's doing this to spite me. James took his hands, his touch steadying. We won't let her. Eli knows you. He trusts you. That matters more than her games. Caleb nodded, but fear gnawed at him. What if Eli chose the other family? What if they offered something Caleb couldn't? He barely slept that night, haunted by memories of his own rejection, the fear that history was repeating itself. The next day, Caleb arrived at St. Mary's early, determined to see Eli. He found him in the courtyard, alone again, his sketchbook open. Hey, Caleb said, sitting beside him. Heard about the other family. Eli's pencil froze. Yeah, they seem nice. Normal. The word stung, but Caleb kept his voice even. Normal's overrated. What do you want, Eli? Eli's eyes met his, vulnerable for the first time. I don't know. I don't want to be alone anymore. You won't be, Caleb promised. Not with us. They talked for hours, longer than ever before. Eli opened up about his past, his parents' rejection, the bullying at the orphanage, the fear that no one would ever want him. Caleb listened, sharing his own story of rebuilding after St. Mary's. It gets better, he said. Not perfect, but better. Eli's trust grew, but the adoption process was a battlefield. Sister Margaret scheduled a meeting with the other family, a wealthy couple from Columbus, the kind of people who fit her idea of proper. Caleb and James attended, too, their presence a quiet act of defiance. The couple, John and Emily, were polite but distant, their answers polished but lacking warmth. Caleb saw the way Eli shrank in their presence, his spark dimming. After the meeting, Caleb pulled Eli aside. What do you think? He asked. Eli shrugged, but his voice was small. They're okay, but they don't get me. Caleb's heart lifted. We do. James and I, we see you. The next hurdle came unexpectedly. Sister Margaret cited concerns about Caleb and James's lifestyle, delaying the adoption with bureaucratic red tape. Caleb hired a lawyer, a fierce advocate named Sarah, who specialized in family law. They're discriminating, Sarah said bluntly. We'll fight it. The legal battle was grueling, draining Caleb's savings and testing his resolve. James kept him grounded, reminding him why they were fighting. Eli's worth it, James said one night, as they sat on their porch, the stars bright above. And so are you. Caleb leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth. I just want him to have what I didn't. He will, James said. Because of you. Back at the orphanage, Caleb and Eli's bond deepened. They started reading together, Eli devouring books Caleb brought from home. One day, Eli showed Caleb a drawing, a house by a lake, two figures standing together. Is that us? Caleb asked, his throat tight. Eli nodded shy. Maybe. Caleb's eyes stung. He was getting through, but the clock was ticking. Sister Margaret's influence lingered, and the other family hadn't backed down. Caleb knew the final decision rested with Eli, and with a system that didn't always value love over prejudice. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating place, its wooden benches hard against Caleb's back. The adoption hearing had arrived, a make-or-break moment for Eli's future. Caleb sat beside James, their hands clasped tightly, as Sarah argued their case. Across the room, John and Emily sat with their lawyer, their faces composed but unreadable. Eli was there, too, looking small in a too-big suit, his eyes darting between Caleb and the judge. Caleb gave him a reassuring smile, but inside, he was a storm of nerves. What if the judge sided with Sister Margaret's biases? What if Eli's voice wasn't heard? Sarah presented their case with precision. Caleb and James's stable home, their commitment to Eli, the bond they'd built. She called witnesses, a social worker who'd seen Caleb with Eli, a therapist who vouched for their readiness as parents. But the other side was formidable, painting Caleb and James as unconventional, a subtle jab at their relationship. When Eli was called to speak, the room fell silent. He stood, his voice trembling but clear. I don't want to be somewhere I have to hide who I am, he said. Caleb and James, they get me. They make me feel safe. Caleb's chest tightened, pride and love overwhelming him. James squeezed his hand, tears in his eyes. The judge listened, her expression unreadable, before adjourning to deliberate. The wait was agony. Caleb and James took Eli for ice cream, trying to keep things light, but the tension hung over them. Eli was quieter than usual, his spoon scraping the bowl. What if they don't let me go with you? He asked. Then we keep fighting, Caleb said firmly. We don't give up on family. Back at home, Caleb and James prepared for the worst, but hope flickered. They turned their guest room into Eli's space. Blue walls, a bookshelf, a soccer ball in the corner. Max, their dog, had already claimed a spot on the rug. It was a home waiting for its final piece. The call came 2 days later. Sarah's voice was steady but triumphant. The judge ruled in your favor. Eli's yours. Caleb sank to the floor, tears streaming down his face as James pulled him into a hug. They'd done it. They were family. At St. Mary's, the goodbye was bittersweet. Sister Margaret handed over the final papers, her face a mask of resignation. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "I do," Caleb replied, his voice unwavering. He took Eli's hand, leading him to the car where James waited. Eli clutched his sketchbook, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. As they drove away, the orphanage shrinking in the rearview mirror, Eli spoke. "Is this real? I'm really coming with you." "It's real," James said, grinning. "Welcome home, Eli." That night, they sat around the dinner table, Max at their feet. Eli was quiet, still adjusting, but he smiled when James told a terrible joke. Caleb watched them, his heart full. This was the family he'd dreamed of, the one he'd fought for. But the transition wasn't easy. Eli struggled with the change, waking from nightmares, testing boundaries. Caleb and James navigated it with patience, leaning on each other when things got tough. They enrolled Eli in school, signed him up for art classes, and watched him slowly come alive. Months later, the lake house was filled with laughter. Eli had settled in, his sketches now covering the fridge, his confidence growing. He still had rough days, moments when the past crept in, but Caleb and James were there, steady and unwavering. One evening, they took Eli to the lake near their home, the same one Caleb had envisioned when he first saw Eli's drawing. They stood on the dock, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Eli held a new sketchbook, a gift from Caleb, his fingers tracing the cover. "Thanks," Eli said, his voice soft. "For everything." Caleb knelt beside him, his heart swelling. "You don't have to thank us. You're our family." Eli looked out at the water, his eyes bright. "I never thought I'd have this." "Neither did I," Caleb admitted. "But we found each other. That's what matters." James joined them, his arm around Caleb's shoulders. They stood together, a family forged through pain and love, stronger for it. The orphanage was a distant memory now, its shadows no match for the light they created. Years later, Eli would graduate high school, his art earning him a scholarship to a prestigious college. Caleb and James would cheer from the audience, their pride a quiet testament to the journey they'd shared. They'd faced challenges, prejudice, doubt, the weight of the past, but they'd face them together, always. The story of Caleb, James, and Eli wasn't just about adoption. It was about rewriting narratives, about choosing love over fear, about building a home where none existed. It was about a boy who was rejected, a man who returned, and a family that proved love could heal even the deepest wounds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli sketched the lake, capturing the moment. Caleb watched, his heart at peace. They'd come full circle, from rejection to redemption, from loneliness to love. And in that quiet moment, they knew they were exactly where they were meant to be.